Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our guidelines for members of the Ananda Sevaka order, the Ananda way of life, which is, you can act it out wherever you are in the world. Today is Monday, and Monday is Money Day, which is the day that I remind you all that the ministry that we carry out, which we call the Mission of the Masters, exists because of your generous donations, and your donations have been exceedingly generous, and it's enabled us to, improve everything that we're doing. For me to have staff that's much more skilled in the other aspects of keeping something like this going, and I'm just, it's so deeply gratifying to me to hear from so many of you that this is really helpful in your life. I've spent almost all of my spiritual life, from my early 20s, as soon as I began to know anything about these teachings, I began to tell anyone who would listen. And Swamiji, seeing that tendency in me, has always directed me toward being able to share these teachings with people, which has given me what I consider to be, in a very blessed life, a very great blessing of never losing track of how extraordinarily life-changing these teachings are, because I've always been at the edge where I'm teaching, I'm sharing with other people what I just learned. And I'm often meeting people who are just being introduced to these teachings, and I see in their eyes the feeling that I had then and still have now, that my prayers have been answered, my life is saved, because now I have an understanding of the meaning of life. And that's what I'm asking you to help me to keep doing in your name and on your behalf, which is serving the great work of these masters. You can go to the website called Patreon, which is a wonderful way of connecting people who have resources to share with individuals who are doing creative work, and that's an ongoing donation. If you go to my website, which is called Asha Joy, there's various ways that you can also donate on an as you feel inspired basis. So with deep appreciation and joy, I remind us that we're all doing this together. So let's now start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel in these guidelines for living the deep power of attunement with our own higher selves. Show us how to be inspired not from the subconscious but from the superconscious, that every decision we make, even the smallest ones in our lives, draw us closer to the divine light. We are your children. Take us home to our happiness, our perfect happiness, which is the bliss of your presence. Om, peace. Amen. Ishani, who's my friend who manages all the online presence, she also reminds me that I need to say, if you haven't subscribed already to Asha's YouTube channel, which is Inner Life with Asha, please do so. We're nudging up toward 10,000 subscribers, which apparently, I think it brings rose petals, showers of rose petals from the masters in the astral world, if they care. But one way or another, it does something that helps our whole effort. So I talk all the time. There's always new offerings being posted. So if you're interested in what I'm doing, please subscribe. Okay, that's the Monday message, and now it's done. So we are in Article 4 of 16 articles in this little booklet, Guidelines for the Ananda Way of Life. And this one is called Home Life, and we got through one paragraph. We have two, and let's see, how do we have? We have a page and a half, so it's going to be a few more days here. Each of it is a paragraph just talking about what would an Ananda home look like. And when we work it from the other side, it's if I am trying to create in my house an atmosphere of an atmosphere that would be supportive to God remembrance. What are the things that I could do? So Swamiji says, first one was, see your home not as your castle, but as a temple of God. That has a lot of implications. Sometimes people develop an attitude of petty tyranny in their own home. And he's suggesting that we consider God to be the only king in the temple, and that we behave in grateful reverence to the true power. So then he says, interactions with others within the home should be based not on egoic familiarity, but on mutual respect and supportiveness and love. That phrase, egoic familiarity, we'll come back to that in a moment. Life's longer rhythm should be emphasized in every familial and friendly relationship. And the frictions of the moment, if any, seen always in a more enduring context. That phrase, egoic familiarity, is really something. I've lived long enough. I've lived in various different family and friend situations. And that phrase is really something. I was raised in a household of 3 children. I'm the middle child, younger sister, older brother. My parents were married for 56 years, and we're very devoted to one another. You know, it's hard as a child to see your parents, and I left home at 18 to just go on with my life. My destiny was not to have a continuous, close, geographically close relationship with my biological family, but I was very well raised in a very nice family. But as it happened, I went back to visit my parents at some point. Maybe I was in my 30s, maybe in my 40s by then, and my brother and my sister and I were there, and there were no spouses, and there's only one grandchild in the whole kit and caboodle, and the grandchild was not present. I'm not sure he existed. But we were all full adults who were all living our independent lives. But as it happened, the 3 of us converged with my 2 parents in the house where my sister and I primarily were raised. My brother only spent a little time there. But we were all 5 together, as it would have been when we were children. And it was so interesting to me because there was just this sudden, and the only word I can use is subconscious vibration. And I don't mean that we all fell asleep. We're a very bright and articulate lot, so it wasn't like it went really dull. It rarely went dull in that household. But nonetheless, I could feel like this web of subconsciousness that was binding us together. And there was a vibratory feeling in that house that I'm not sure that unique combination of 5 united just like that at any other time that I can think of, and that's partly why it was so vivid. My brother is a couple of years older than I, and it could be perhaps my earliest memory, because I had to have been small enough for my brother and I both to be able to be side by side in the bathtub. And he was always making up games and doing imaginative things. And we would soap up the slanted end of the bathtub and then try to climb up the side of the bathtub. And the game was named I Want Way Up There. And we would sort of slither up the side. I mean, I don't know if I could talk, or I don't know if I was old enough to talk even, but he would make a big noise, and as we would try to get way up there. So you're small enough to try to crawl up the side of a bathtub, and it was way up there, especially when it was soaked. It was difficult. So, these are the very happy things of which at least my childhood was made, of just a very loving family. My mother had been a teacher of small children at one point, although she married young and didn't really have much of a career, but she loved children, and so she enjoyed taking care of us. But just think of that. You're two naked babies like that, and you're just having this whole experience, and it just imprints really deeply on a cellular level. And then the thousands of other things, Monopoly games and all the things that kids do, just all of it. And there we were full-grown adults. I mean, my brother and I were not about to get into the bathtub again and play a game like that. First of all, we wouldn't fit, but it really wasn't that far up there anymore, But there was just this feeling about it. And of course, that's the familial warmth. In Autobiography of a Yogi, when Master tells the story of running away to the Himalayas as a young boy, and he runs away with his friend, I think his name was Jitendra, if I'm not mistaken, and they sneak out and they try to get away, and then his older brother Ananda apprehends them, and then the relatives come, and so now they've been caught by the authorities, Jitendra and Yogananda. They've been caught by the authorities, and his companion Jitendra's relatives have arrived, but Yogananda's relatives have not yet arrived to retrieve the boys. And Yogananda says to his friend, we could still escape. We could sneak out here. We could still go up to the Himalayas. And then he talks about how his companion is not that interested in going anymore. And here's the phrase: because he was basking in the familial warmth. That's what it was called. That Jitendra had, just snuggled down again into that protective feeling of the family, and his spiritual adventurousness had given in to the feeling of familial warmth. And so that's a phrase, there's phrases in Autobiography of a Yogi, but familial warmth, the basking in the familial warmth, is one of those elements that is out there. Now, I'm aware of the fact that I can look back very fondly on my childhood, and I can look back with increasing gratitude, as an adult person, and I realize how hard my father worked, to make a life for us, and, how hard my parents worked to get along with each other. I mean, just all these different things that I couldn't comprehend as a child, and I have tremendous gratitude for the effort and sacrifice that it takes to raise children, especially to raise them conscientiously as my parents did. Let me just a moment, I've lost that thought. But so I really have respect for this. I used to not have respect for it. I used to have a sort of an immature spiritual attitude of disregard for these things. And the benefit of familial warmth, if you had it in your life, is we understand it, and that's why Master posits it like that. So people have in their minds that they want to create that atmosphere, which of course you do. You want to create, especially if you're raising children, but even as adults, just childless couples or groups of friends living together, we want home, if not to be a castle, we want it to be a haven. But the haven has to be based on enduring values. And it can't be created just by demanding it. And it can't be created from the outside in. And it can't be created by egoic familiarity. And that's where we get confused, because egoic familiarity ultimately just leads to confusion. It's It's one of those aspects of muddy thinking and feeling that leads to chaos, which is a phrase Swamiji put in an unrelated treatise about money magnetism when he was talking about the importance of crystal clarity in thought and feeling. And in contrast to crystal clarity, muddy thoughts and feelings lead to chaos. I mean, it was just a simple statement like that. And trying to create closeness based on egoic familiarity is one of those things that looks like it's going to work, but in the end it doesn't. Because egos are very complicated. And the individual karma that we bring with us, it can't be resolved merely by wanting it to be resolved. I remember a woman came to me for counseling. She had a certain service that she offered that was attractive to me. She was a consultant in various ways in subjects that were useful to me. So we were going to make a trade. She needed some counseling and I needed the services she had to offer, so we were going to trade session for session. And she needed enough sessions from me. She was caught up in some very complicated romantic situation. Somehow there was herself and two men involved, and one from the past, one from the present. And when we were talking about how many sessions might be needed, well, she wanted to have enough sessions to finish and get rid of the karma with the man from the past. I said, well, honey, that's going to be just this lifetime, and then we're going to have this deal go on to the next lifetime. Because on the level that you're trying to resolve this, which was the level of egoic familiarity, it's not going to resolve. We might be able to progress it, we might be able to clarify it, but these things are just really, really complicated. I remember when I was caught up in this very complicated karma with another individual, and circumstances finally separated us physically. And I was hoping that the physical separation would mean that the karma was finished. And when Swami was talking to me about it, he said like this, well, perhaps the karma is finished. And it was like he watched my inner spirit jump up in the air and go, hallelujah. And then he let me and no words were spoken, but he watched it and I felt it like that. And but then he just let it sit just long enough for me to feel what that might feel like. And then he said, but I don't think so. He was always teasing me because he knew that if he could make me laugh, I would have a better chance of being able to hear what he had to say. A reason I realized about that, and just only recently, when you laugh, you come right into the present. Think about it. Whenever you're laughing, I mean really laughing about something, you forget. You forget past and future, don't you? And that's one of the reasons why Swami said Master would tell jokes when he was giving his sermons. He was very humorous. But often right after he had the audience laughing, he would slip in some very important point. And I watched Swami certainly tease me a lot and make me laugh, and then and then say what he needed to say. I've got a lot of things bookmarked here, but I'm going to get back to it. When Swami was teasing me about something once, I teasing him back, said, Swamiji, you're making fun of me, just with a fake pout like that. Swami got extremely serious, which is always, when I make a joke and he gets really serious, it's like, what's coming next? But he got very serious, very thoughtful. He said, no, actually, he said, Asha, I'm not making fun of you. I'm merely taking advantage of the fun which is already present. It's like that. So there we were. Let me just back it all the way up. So, the main point is once you start laughing, you're out of the past and the future. And I mean, I think I'm typical, but all of my anxiety, almost all my anxiety is because of concern for what already happened, regret, anxiety, shame, embarrassment for what happened in the past. and anticipating some terrible repetition of it in the future. It's astonishing how often or how rarely I'm actually suffering in the moment, that there's actual pain in the moment. It's almost always the pain of remembering and the pain of anticipating. And of course, all of that keeps us very much from being able to have crystal clarity in the moment, because we're so busy, just being preoccupied with that which doesn't exist, except in our own, mental process. So when Swami told me that perhaps the karma was over, for a moment, I got to just enjoy that prospect. Then he said, but I don't think so. And which made me laugh, because it was so perfectly executed what he'd done. And then he said, but you've taken it as far as you can take it now, because ego is just too complicated. He said, it has to go on the shelf. What he actually said, just to make it clear, has to go on the shelf. You can't grow anymore by just being up against it like this. You have to go off and grow in other ways, and then you'll come back to the same situation. But he said, just so you'll know, you may progress to the point where it's essentially decided, where you've solved the vibrational problem, and then you won't actually have to meet that individual again. And if they haven't shifted their vibration, that's what I mean. Solve the vibrational problem, which is meaning transcending the egoic qualities that cause the grief. But your vibration is shifted, your understanding is shifted, you're just not going to get trapped on that same level again. If they haven't gotten over it, then they'll just act it out with someone else. They don't have to, their ignorance does not bind you. They're still bound by their ignorance, and therefore something has to happen, but it doesn't have to happen with you. Or the both of you will come back in this life or another, and you'll play it out, finish what you're doing. Okay, that's all the egoic familiarity. It's like, I have this and I want it, and you have this and you want it, and even people of very goodwill, even people who really love each other. I often remark to people, it's not hard to love people. Loving people is actually very easy. Living with them, now that's an entirely different issue, because we fall into the egoic familiarity. We begin to think that we know that person. And we begin to have expectations, and we begin to respond to them, well, in that subconscious way. I mean, that's why family relationships are often so very difficult, is because you have this extraordinary subconscious miasma, just all like this. I'm really ashamed on very deep levels. Even after all my years of spiritual living, I came to the spiritual path when I met Swami when I was 22. I was born, my mother was a little less than 30, I think, when I was born. And so there was 30 years, at least, after I became a devotee, living on the spiritual path, that I still knew my parents, because they lived until their 80s, mid-80s. But I'm ashamed of how much the subconscious miasma still confused me. Now they've been gone 20 years or so. When I think about it, I profoundly and deeply wish I could have stepped away from that egoic familiarity and really seen them just for who they were. I felt like I could have been so much more of a friend to them. I certainly did my best, but I could have been more of a friend to them if I could have extricated myself from that. And how many times in our family relationships do we just find ourselves sucked down these rabbit holes? It's the only way I can think to say it. You're just sort of walking along, and suddenly you're just down in this warren of confusion, because we haven't kept just that degree of appreciation. That this is a divine soul. I remember once I was trying to urge upon someone who was close to me a certain, attitude and way of behaving. I have painfully learned not to do that sort of thing anymore, but I was prone to it for many years in the name of being helpful. Our, our worst qualities are very often our best qualities taken just a little too far. I have a lot of insight. I have a certain amount of intuition. I have an appalling ability to put everything I think and know into words. Sometimes I might give the impression that I know a lot. It's not that I know a lot. It's that I can articulate every little scrap of information I have. Many people in my world have far more really to share, but they're either not inclined to articulate everything. But I do. I can articulate it, and I have mistakenly thought that people are interested in times when they're not. And I was trying to urge upon someone a certain behavior or change or something. And I do not remember how Swamiji got into the middle of it. I can't even imagine how Swamiji got in the middle of it, but somehow he was. And I said to him, don't you think so-and-so would be better off if they, paid attention to what I want? And he said, yes. It's, you're not wrong. He said, yes, oh yes, it would be very helpful for them, very beneficial for them. I mean, see, Swami was so honest. It would be very beneficial for them if they were interested in what you have to say. He said, but they're not interested. And therefore you have to wait until the impulse comes from them. Oh yeah, free will. Oh yeah, I don't appreciate it when people assault me with their point of view either. Like, how could I forget that? Egoic familiarity, that's how we forget it. We forget to stand in reverential awe over the fact that, my goodness, each of us is just an independent jiva making its way from delusion to freedom. Every single one of us. And the most fascinating thing to me, which I contemplate a great deal because it's a necessary thing to remember, everybody makes sense to themselves. No matter how transparently incorrect they may appear to you, if that person felt that, they would behave differently. And no amount of our articulating it, no matter how clearly we can articulate it, is going to change them until something within them resonates with the idea of that change. And egoic familiarity makes us begin to think that I can take my ego preference and impose it on you. Now, the reason most people don't always think in terms, as Swami put, in mutual respect, supportiveness, is because we grow impatient. We grow impatient. We imagine that our suffering is caused because of your behavior. We have a false sense of responsibility. We grow fearful. Often we grow fearful. What I'm going to call a young friend of mine who was below the age of 20 at the time. And I have, because I've grown up meaning I've spent my whole adult life in one community, I have generational friendships. I have adult friends that I jokingly say that I knew you before you were born, because I knew your parents before they got married, what to speak of before they even gave birth to you. So I knew you before you were born, but now I'm dealing with a full adult person. Just a moment, let me think what I was going to say. Oh yes. My young friend complained to me that his mother was so anxious about him all the time, and that he was a little reckless, and he did reckless things, and his mother was always so nervous about the reckless things he did. But then he said, for her, if the catastrophes that she anticipated happened, she doesn't have the sense of adventure or energy that I have. He said, for me, much of her expectation is fulfilled in his reckless young life. But for him to run out of gas, 10 miles from any place where he can get gas, to be alone with his friend at 2 in the morning, is just fun. and he has the energy and the creativity and the sense of adventure, it's not a problem. It's just something that has to be dealt with. In other words, we get afraid. We try to be protective. We want it to be different. Swami says, I suggest that you not do that. I suggest that you not do that. We'll talk a little bit more about what the positive side of this looks. But this is the beginning. If self-realization is the goal, if all of us are equally children of God, if reincarnation is true and we've all been together in many forms, many times, then what should our relationships, even with those who are closest to us, how should we express our love for one another? You know, this is the path of self-realization. This is the Ananda way of life. And we'll talk more about this tomorrow. God bless you.